Well, hello. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Jeff Wilson. I'm the superintendent here in San Marino Unified School District. And if you're watching this, it is likely that you're interested in our board candidate vacancy information. So let's jump right in. The purpose of the presentation is to introduce you to information about school board membership, time commitments, governance, and expectations. So, really board performance is all about culture. When you have a healthy board culture, you get a very high level of performance. And the culture is developed through the individual's commitments to the procedures and protocols and systems, and then also doing that in a way that is relationship building. And what are the dimensions of effective leadership of a school district? Well, first of all, high expectations. We certainly all understand that here in San Marino, but also a stable environment, always focusing on continuous improvement. And then, of course, relationships, as I mentioned earlier, are super important as we develop a coherent leadership team that works together. So as far as individual board members go, it's sometimes people get clouded about this, but elected officials really have no inherent power as individuals by simply holding the office. In fact, they don't have any greater power or authority than any other qualified voter in the community. So it's important to understand that true power from a board of education comes through the collective authority of the board in a limited way and through actions, official actions, in a properly convened meeting. So as far as the governance domains, it's important to separate governance from management. And if you talk about that, you look at the Board of Education, these things are listed up here, but the Board of Education really is about adopting policy, evaluating results, aligning all the resources, and then monitoring the fiscal health of the district. And of course, really looking at visions and goals and strategic planning and working with the superintendent and staff on that. With the superintendent really manages the organization, evaluates progress and processes, is really responsible for the financial management, all the operations of schools, developing and implementing the action plan today through the LCAP, as we know, and makes recommendations and advises the Board of Education, also enforces the laws, the rules, and the regulations of the school district. So as far as responsibilities of the Board of Education, the first thing I want to stress, and it's not meant to scare you away, is that time commitment is very heavy, and I'll jump into that in a second. Also today, I'd like to just make sure we understand the difference between governance and management. And then what about the Brown Act that I'm sure you've heard so much about? And what does that mean for confidentiality? And knowing that a Board of Education really is exposed to all of the confidential information of a school district. And then what about the board members' preparation for meetings? What does that involve? And then understanding board bylaws, policies, and protocols. And I'll spend a little time at the end looking at the challenges in San Marino. This is not meant to blow you away, but if you look at this real quickly, some time commitments. The Board of Education currently meets 19 times a year in regular Board of Education meetings. Those are held on Tuesday evenings, second and fourth Tuesdays of most months. There's a few where there's just a single one. Often we have closed session, which begins at 5 p.m. usually, and then open session at 7 p.m. Total time commitments for regular board meeting nights last between 4 and 5 hours, and likely sometimes beyond that. Special meetings. We had 14 special meetings during this last year, and they're held for strategic planning, issues that arise from the public, critical deadlines that arise, planning for elections. You've heard a lot about special meetings that we've held. In fact, we're holding special meetings about replacing board vacancies. Those meetings typically last between 1 and 3 hours, and you think about 14 of those, that begins to add up. There's many other public commitments that board members are expected to be a part of. That includes many public appearances like parades and community events and the Mid-Autumn Festival, parent parties. There's all kinds of neat stuff that goes on that board members are a part of. City Club, Rotary, board members also represent the district on multiple committees and groups. And then, of course, all the school events, and we have so many of them here in San Marino, open houses and showcases, performances, right, games, in events that you're very familiar with that board members are expected to be a part of. Also, there is a requirement. This last year, the board adopted Board Bylaw 9240, which essentially directs current board members and new board members into Masters in Governance training within 1 year of being placed on the board. And I know board member Chan is just finishing up right now, and I spoke to her about this. And really, the time commitment here is about 50 hours, 45 hours in 5 two-day sessions, and then probably prep time about 5 hours. So about 50 hours there. And those courses are offered right now virtually and in person. And they begin on Fridays at 1 p.m. and they conclude on Saturdays at 12:30 p.m. So if you look at the total time commitment of board members, it's staggering. Meetings add up to about 86 hours. Other public appearances, and the note there is that this is highly variable depending on the board member, but as much as 160 hours there. The Masters in Governance course is about 50 hours. The board packets and the WBM we'll talk about later is about 100 hours combined. That's 396 hours. Just keep in mind the Masters in Governance is one time, 1 year only. So beyond, if you stay on the board beyond 1 year, you won't have to repeat that. But if you look at this, 396 hours equates to about 49 and a half 8-hour working days. So that's a huge commitment as a board member here in San Marino. What about the difference between governance and management? And so you can kind of read this here, but as far as what a board member does, it really they want to focus, or the board as a whole wants to focus on the education of all students, making sure that we're meeting the needs of all kids. Obviously, hiring, as we're going to go through here very soon. And annually evaluating the superintendent, another function of the board. They will annually adopt and approve a budget in June for the following year. They do provide oversight of the management of the district and, of course, financial oversight, as we mentioned earlier. The board makes decisions on personnel matters and recommendations, often in closed session. Those decisions are made. Oversee the facilities and insurance. They adjudicate matters that come before them on occasion, sometimes between the public and staff. They review and approve curriculum and textbooks. They approve contracts entered into by the district. But here's the key to being an effective board and an effective board member. If you come to the board as an individual and desire to remain an individual, your effectiveness as a board member will be limited. It really is through the collective voice of the board, a single board voice, via a spokesperson, and that usually is the president, that the true power of the board surfaces. And so it is, again, the individual setting aside their differences, and even when they choose as an individual to vote against an action, that once that action is taken is to stand together as a board of education as one voice. That is an effective school board. So best practices: serve the best interests of all students, not just a narrow philosophy or specific agenda. You would be here to represent the entire community, not just a single constituency. And oftentimes, board members, not just here, but everywhere, struggle with that transition from being a candidate to being a board member. So once you're on the board, it's your duty to represent the entire community, not just those who cast their vote for you. And then understand and let the mission and the vision and the core beliefs guide your work and the work of the district. So what is the importance of effective governance? It really is that the school board's goal should be to serve as a reflective representative of the public interest, right? The school board does not exist to run this local system, but to govern the individuals that do. And again, that's often where things get cloudy. A board of education is not put in place to manage a school district, right? They govern the individuals, specifically the superintendent, who does that work. The school board tells the superintendent how not to operate rather than how to operate, if that makes sense. So just a few more words about governance on that. And in the end, as we all know, it's all about the students. The moral imperative is all about student learning. It contains strategies to ensure that learning occurs. It involves rapport between the board and the superintendent, consists of a strong, focused relationship between the board and staff, and of course looks at indicators of progress, combining excellence and equity together. So the Brown Act, you've probably heard quite a bit about the Brown Act. Really the purpose of the Brown Act is to keep the public informed of the actions, debates, and views of its locally elected representatives, to provide procedural framework, to meet, debate, act, listen, and collectively to themselves, agency staff, and their constituency. It's really important to understand the Brown Act is that this is the legal framework within which the Board of Education acts. Some of the basics of the Brown Act, and if you want to look into this further, I've provided the URLs here. The purpose is to promote transparency, public participation in local government. And a key point here is that a Board of Education meeting is not meant to be a town hall. It's not meant to be a back and forth between the public and the board. It really is the opportunity for the public to observe the board as they do their business and to provide the board one-way communications that might inform board member decision making. But again, it's not a town hall approach. It's observing the board doing their business and commenting on the work of the board. All the meetings of the legislative body of a local agency will be open and public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting of this legislative body of a local agency unless an exception applies. So it's open, it's available to the public. A meeting is any gathering of the majority of members of a legislative body at the same time and location to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item that's within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. So again, we have a 5-member board. So if 3 of those board members gather and they discuss or they listen or deliberate on any item before the board, that would have to be a properly convened meeting. So this would include meetings by teleconference, as we learned during the pandemic, or communications by other electronic means. There are exceptions to notice meetings, individual board members, contacts or conversations between member and another person. Just be careful of engaging in what's called serial meetings or meetings away from the table. Majority of members at certain open and publicized conferences like CSBA is an example of that, where more than a quorum of board members may attend, or any other meeting of another organization or legislative body, as long as the board members do not talk to each other about agency business. So they can be together in greater than a quorum as long as they're not talking about agency business. And then a majority of the members at a purely social or ceremonial occasion, careful not to talk to each other about agency business, and this creates a public perception of improper discussions. What about social media? So this is the newest piece, and this actually came before our board in the last year when a member of the public complained of serial board communication via social media. In 2020, Governor Newsom signed AB 992 into law, and essentially it prohibited board members from engaging in serial meetings via social media. Specifically, if a board member raises an issue and a quorum of the board or 2 other members of the board respond, even with likes or emojis, could be construed as a serial meeting of the Board of Education. So once again, just to drill down a little bit further on this, the Board of Education may only act as a board, meaning 3 or greater, when they are properly convened in a legal meeting. What about confidentiality? So the purpose of closed session with regards to a board is that they can conduct in private away from the public for certain specific reasons. A couple of them here. They can do labor negotiations or instruct negotiators on real property transactions. They can discuss pending litigation with attorneys. They can consider the appointment, employment, evaluation, discipline, or dismissal of any public employee. As far as the confidentiality goes on this, no person may disclose confidential information that has been acquired by being present in an authorized closed session to unauthorized persons unless the legislative body formally authorizes disclosure of confidential information, such as with an attorney representing the agency. Confidential information means a communication made in closed session that is specifically related to the basis for the closed session. So anything that happens behind closed doors in closed session related to items on the closed session agenda is highly confidential, and violating this actually creates an offense as a misdemeanor. So let's turn now to what does it mean to prepare for regular meetings of the Board of Education. Well, so every second and fourth Tuesday, usually, we have a regular board meeting. And what will happen is the agenda for that regular board meeting will be posted on our website 72 hours in advance. That would be Saturday at 7 p.m., but usually we post by Friday prior to the end of the close of the regular day. A board packet is delivered to each board member. And for 2021-22, we're going to move to an all electronic board packet. unless specifically requested by a board member. Each Board of Education member should read through that packet carefully. It's not meant to be shared with the public. It's private information that prepares each board member for the Tuesday board meeting. In addition to that, every Friday, there's a weekly board memo that comes out from the superintendent, assistant superintendent, the CTO, and our director of education. And that's meant to keep the board informed of timely issues from within each of those departments. During the weekend, usually board members review the packet, the WBM, and then some of the board members might have additional questions, which they can email to the superintendent over the weekend or by Monday at noon. The cabinet would then work on providing the answers to the superintendent, who will then coalesce those into one document and send them back out to the board members prior to the meeting on Tuesday night. Anything beyond that, of course, Board of Education members have access to the superintendent and certainly can contact at any point along that journey. So that's how information is disseminated and how board members should prepare for that. And then there's some questions about what is a board bylaw, board policies, protocols of conduct. So board policies, real simply, and I've provided some links there for you that you can take a look at after this presentation. But bylaws are the legally binding rules that outline how the board will operate. And so if you go to that gamut online, you can go look at all the board bylaws. Essentially, this is how the board functions within the school district. Policies are vast and numerous and have to do with really every aspect of the school district. And they're statements that set forth the purposes and prescribe in general terms the organization and program of the system. So really, think of it as a framework and how the superintendent and staff can discharge assigned duties in a positive direction. And then we have a unique piece called Protocols of Conduct. And again, I've given you an access link there to take a look. All of this you can find on our website under the board section. And this really is how SMUSD board members should behave in meetings, at school sites, the district office, and community events. Well, as I sort of draw this to a close, I do appreciate your patience in listening to this and watching the presentation. These are challenging times here in SMUSD, and I have great hope that in the very near future, a lot of these challenges will be set behind the school district as it moves into a bright future. But right now, we do have some external challenges. We have economic, social, political pressure to increase student achievement always here in San Marino. Do we feel that pressure? It's really hard when you're considered to be the #1 school district in LA County and the number, I believe, 3 school district in the state of California to improve. But we're always looking for ways to do a better job in reaching all of our students. Teacher and administrator accountability is always difficult in a public school system. And so that's always going to be a challenge as the board considers new and better ways to really hold in a positive way our schools and our personnel accountable. You've heard much from me and others about our dwindling resources and fiscal constraints here in San Marino Unified School District. You've heard me talk about us being in a funding gulf where we are neither basic aid nor are we low socioeconomic, which means in the state of California, we get the fewest educational dollars from the state and the feds to operate. And so there is a vast difference in the amount of dollars we get per student here in San Marino than in districts right around us that in many cases get 33 to 50% more per student, and in really extreme cases like Beverly Hills with basic aid, who get more than double the dollars to operate on than we do. So that's a huge external challenge. We have a regional problem with declining enrollment. Every school district around us is bleeding students. And so that is going to be a challenge specifically for us because most of our state and federal revenue comes through the per student allocation. So really shoring up that enrollment piece is going to be a huge focus moving forward here in San Marino. Also, the emphasis on mental health, social emotional learning and wellness, issues of equity, diversity, bias, and racism, including ethnic studies, staff training, and student engagement. These are big issues that we are mired right in the middle of right now. And especially coming out of this pandemic and getting our kids well and connected and focused on a whole child approach to learning. So that's going to continue to be an external challenge for us. And then what does it look like after COVID, right? What does a post-COVID education system look like? We're all awaiting guidance from Sacramento on funding issues surrounding that, but we recognize that after coming through this time of virtual learning and hybrid learning, that there's going to continue to be a larger demand from our public to offer multiple different ways for students to access their education. As far as internal challenges, we have a very engaged community demanding accountability. We have a heavy dependence, as I mentioned, on local revenues through our 2 parcel taxes, our foundation giving, our PTA giving, and then other donations. We have major facility issues looming with no funding sources to support. Once Measure S failed to pass last year, we really don't have any mechanism for addressing the myriad of deferred maintenance issues that we have here in the district. So this new board, working with the new superintendent, is going to have to consider how to address those issues. The superintendent search process is right in front of us. One of the first things you'll be involved in is that process of identifying and seating a new superintendent. And then looming just off in the distance is the need for a new strategic plan. The current board began some of that work, but there's a lot of work that needs to go into identifying where's San Marino going to be in 5 or 10 years. We have a very low percentage of administrators to account for the work. There are people in the community who cried for further reductions in administration. Our administration is as lean as any in the state and cannot get much leaner just to get the work done that's required by the state of California. And then we are coming out of 2 very difficult years of budget cuts and layoffs, as has been well documented, and the hope is with Measure E passing at the end of June, that we'll be able to enter into a little bit of a period of peace and reconstruction. The overall budget issues, I mentioned declining enrollment, but stirs and purrs. So pension benefits are going to continue to spike. In fact, during the pandemic, they were sort of leveled off artificially, which means that the state is going to come back and capture more of that in the near future. The continuance of special education encroachment on the general fund. Some people don't like that word. There really is no other way to identify it except that we have mandates to address very expensive individual needs of students and not the requisite funding from the federal or state government to support that. So those will continue to be encroachments on our general fund. We mentioned the aging facilities. And then the LCFF, the local control funding formula, as I mentioned, we're a low LCFF district. And finally, expectation for ongoing increased local revenues. Declining enrollment, I mentioned it. Lack of funding. Each student represents right now about $10,200 per kid. So if you decline 100 students, you lose $1 million or slightly over $1 million. We have declined over the last 10 years about 500 students. So you can see that's a decline of, in today's dollars, around $5 million. And then we have programs and overhead. Our district really does function most efficiently at about 3,200. Right now, we are a tick over 2,800. And then the scale and risk consolidation. Many districts who are declining contemplate closing schools. We're not considering that, but it's super important that the Board of Education moving into the future addresses this issue. In closing, I just want to talk about 8 characteristics of an effective school board. First, that they commit to a vision of high expectation and they're very clear in their definition of goals. A high-functioning board has shared beliefs and values that all students can learn and all students can thrive and succeed. A high-functioning board collaborates effectively together. They don't battle each other, and they communicate as one. A high-functioning board uses data for continuous improvement, aligns and sustains its resources to meet district goals, works as a team with the superintendent on a foundation of trust, is accountability-driven, and focus on policy to improve student achievement, and then engages in team and professional development. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for your willingness to serve this community. And I hope that you carefully consider as you consider whether to put in an application, or perhaps you already have, whether you have the time, the commitment, the willingness to be a communal learner together and work together with your fellow board members for the future of San Marino and its students. So with that, I just say thank you and have a great, great day.